There are certain silences a man creates, not because he has stopped feeling, but because he has started feeling too much. And if you have ever looked into someone's eyes and sensed emotions they could never fully explain, then tonight something inside you may finally begin to make sense. A man who is emotionally attached does not always confess it loudly. He does not always become poetic. He does not always know how to say the words his heart keeps repeating in private. But there is one sign, one deeply human behavior that almost always appears when his soul becomes emotionally connected to someone. And once you recognize it, you will never look at emotional attachment the same way again. Because the truth is, when a man becomes emotionally attached, he slowly begins to reveal the parts of himself he hides from the rest of the world. Most people misunderstand men emotionally. They assume attachment looks obvious. They expect constant texting, dramatic confessions, or endless affection. But masculine psychology is far more complex than that. Many men were raised to suppress vulnerability long before they ever learned how to understand it. They were taught to stay composed, stay logical, stay strong. And because of this, emotional attachment often escapes through behavior long before it escapes through words. A man may remain calm on the outside while internally fighting emotional storms he cannot explain to anyone. This is why emotionally intelligent people learn to observe energy, patterns, and silence, not just language. And the one sign that almost always appears when a man is emotionally attached is emotional consistency during emotional distance, not perfection, not obsession, not constant communication, consistency. Because when a man becomes emotionally attached to someone, their emotional presence enters his psychological world permanently. Even when he withdraws, even when life overwhelms him, even when fear confuses him, he keeps returning emotionally. Something inside him refuses to disconnect completely. His attention may drift for moments, but his emotional energy always circles back toward the person he truly feels connected to. This is where many people become confused. They think emotionally attached men always chase aggressively, but deep attachment often creates the opposite reaction at first. A man who truly feels emotionally connected may suddenly become quieter, more careful, more emotionally observant. Why? Because emotional attachment creates emotional risk, and risk awakens fear, especially in people who spent years protecting themselves from rejection, abandonment, or emotional humiliation. Suddenly, clears throat, the connection feels important. Suddenly, losing someone feels dangerous. Suddenly, vulnerability no longer theoretical. It feels personal. Carl Jung once spoke deeply about the shadow self, the hidden emotional world buried beneath social masks. And when a man becomes emotionally attached, his shadow begins to surface. Not because he wants it to, but because attachment activates emotional truths he can no longer fully control. He starts thinking about the person unexpectedly. He remembers details he normally forgets. He notices emotional shifts in their voice, their energy, their silence. He becomes psychologically affected by their absence in ways he cannot logically justify. Even if he tries to appear emotionally detached, his subconscious behavior begins revealing the attachment for him. This is why emotionally attached men often become strangely protective of emotional connection itself, not possessive in unhealthy ways, but emotionally protective. They start caring about whether are emotionally safe, emotionally hurt, emotionally distant, emotionally tired. Your emotional state begins affecting theirs, and this shift is extremely important psychologically because when someone else's emotions begin influencing a man's internal world consistently, attachment has already formed beneath the surface. You will notice something fascinating about emotionally attached men. They may disappear physically for moments, but emotionally, they remain psychologically present. A random message, a subtle check-in, a remembered conversation from weeks ago, a concern hidden behind casual words. This happens because emotional attachment creates invisible continuity in the mind. The connection continues internally even during silence. He may try distracting himself with work, routines, responsibilities, or pride, but emotionally attached men rarely stop thinking about the person who emotionally moved them deeply. And this is where many women become emotionally exhausted. They misinterpret emotional withdrawal as emotional absence, but these are not always the same thing. Sometimes a man withdraws because he feels nothing, but other times, he withdraws because he feels too much and lacks the emotional language to process it. Masculine loneliness is rarely discussed honestly in modern life. Many men carry emotional pain silently for years. They learn how to survive pressure, but never learn how to express emotional vulnerability safely. So, when real attachment appears, they become emotionally conflicted. One part of them wants closeness, another part fears dependence. One side craves connection, the other fears losing control. This internal conflict creates emotionally confusing behavior. He may seem deeply connected one moment and emotionally distant the next. But if attachment is real, one thing always remains constant beneath the fluctuations. Emotional return. He keeps coming back emotionally. His attention reorients towards you repeatedly because genuine emotional attachment creates psychological gravity. The soul remembers where it feels emotionally understood, and emotional understanding is incredibly powerful for men. Many men go years without feeling truly emotionally seen. People often expect them to perform strength without asking what hides beneath it. They become providers, protectors, problem solvers, while quietly starving emotionally inside. So, when someone finally makes them feel emotionally safe without demanding performance, something profound happens internally. Their nervous system softens. Their emotional defenses weaken. Their subconscious begins associating peace with that person's presence. This is why emotionally attached men often reveal themselves indirectly first. They may not say, "I need you." Instead, they begin including you in their inner world slowly. They share thoughts they normally keep private. They become curious about your emotional patterns. They remember small details because emotional attachment sharpens emotional attention. And perhaps most importantly, they begin showing consistency during difficult moments, not just easy ones. Anyone can show affection when life feels exciting, but emotional attachment reveals itself most clearly during emotional discomfort. Watch how a man behaves after conflict. Watch whether he emotionally disappears permanently or whether he returns to repair emotional distance. Because emotionally attached people cannot comfortably remain disconnected for long periods without internal discomfort. The emotional bond continues pulling at them internally even while pride tries resisting it. And pride has destroyed countless emotionally meaningful connections, especially for men taught to equate vulnerability with weakness. Sometimes a deeply attached man will remain silent not because he does not care, but because caring feels terrifying to admit fully. The deeper the attachment becomes, the more emotionally exposed he feels. Suddenly, your opinion matters too much. Your absence feels too heavy. Your rejection feels capable of wounding places inside him he spent years protecting. So he hesitates. He overthinks. He becomes emotionally cautious. But attachment always leaks through behavior eventually. You will see it in the way he listens differently when you speak. In the way his emotional energy shifts when you become distant. In the way he tries understanding your pain even when he cannot fully articulate his own. Emotionally attached men become emotionally attentive in subtle ways. And subtlety is important here. Because genuine attachment often grows quietly before it becomes obvious. There is also something deeply spiritual about emotional attachment that psychology alone cannot fully explain. Certain people awaken forgotten emotional dimensions inside us. Their presence activates buried tenderness, hidden fears, unresolved wounds, and unexpected hope simultaneously. This is why emotionally intense connections often feel both beautiful and terrifying. They force people to confront themselves emotionally, and many men are unprepared for the emotional mirror true attachment creates. A man who is emotionally attached often begins confronting his own emotional immaturity. Unconsciously, he realizes where he struggles with vulnerability. He notices his fear of emotional dependence. He becomes aware of wounds he thought he had buried successfully. Attachment becomes a psychological awakening, and this awakening can either transform him or scare him deeply. Some men run from this transformation initially, not because the connection lacks meaning, but because it has too much meaning. People rarely fear shallow emotions. They fear deep ones. Deep emotions carry consequences. They challenge identity. They expose wounds. They demand emotional honesty. And honesty is difficult for people who spent years emotionally disconnected from themselves. This is why patience matters when observing emotional attachment, not blind patience that tolerates mistreatment, but emotionally intelligent patience that recognizes human complexity. Emotionally attached men are still human beings carrying histories, fears, insecurities, and unresolved pain. Attachment does not instantly make someone emotionally perfect. Sometimes, it simply begins the process of emotional awakening. And perhaps this explains why emotionally attached men often become unexpectedly gentle. Not weak, gentle. There is a difference. Their tone softens around the person they care about. Their emotional reactions become more thoughtful. They become careful with words because emotionally attached people fear causing emotional damage to someone they genuinely value. Even highly masculine men often reveal surprising tenderness when emotional attachment becomes deep enough. But there is another truth few people discuss honestly. Emotional attachment can also make men emotionally restless because attachment creates vulnerability and vulnerability removes emotional certainty. Suddenly, they care too much about outcomes they cannot fully control. This is why attached men sometimes overanalyze communication, silence, distance, and emotional shifts. Their subconscious becomes hyper-aware of potential loss, and loss terrifies emotionally attached people more than they usually admit. You may notice him checking your emotional energy indirectly, asking subtle questions, observing your mood carefully, trying to sense whether emotional connection still exists between you. Because emotionally attached men seek reassurance differently than many women expect. Sometimes reassurance for a man is not verbal affection. Sometimes it is emotional consistency, emotional safety, peaceful presence, feeling emotionally accepted without needing to perform constantly. This becomes especially important when a man has experienced emotional betrayal before. Past heartbreak changes emotional behavior profoundly. A wounded man may crave attachment while simultaneously fearing it. He may want closeness while instinctively preparing for abandonment. And unless he heals these internal contradictions consciously, they appear within his relationships repeatedly. This is where shadow work becomes necessary. Real emotional maturity requires confronting unconscious fears instead of projecting them onto others. A man who becomes emotionally attached eventually faces a choice. Remain emotionally guarded forever or risk emotional honesty despite uncertainty. And this choice defines the depth of every meaningful connection he will ever experience. Because love without vulnerability is merely performance. An emotional attachment without emotional courage becomes silent suffering. Many men live inside this silent suffering longer than people realize. They care deeply but struggle expressing it. They feel emotionally connected but fear emotional exposure. They want intimacy but panic when intimacy becomes real. And behind their emotional inconsistency often exists a frightened inner world they rarely show anyone. Yet when healing begins, something beautiful happens. Emotionally attached men slowly stop treating emotions like enemies. They begin understanding that vulnerability is not weakness. It is emotional truth. They stop running from connection and start learning how to remain emotionally present even during discomfort. This transformation is powerful because emotionally mature masculine energy creates emotional safety instead of emotional confusion. And emotional safety is one of the rarest experiences in modern relationships. To feel emotionally safe means you no longer fear being emotionally punished for being human. You no longer feel pressure to hide sadness, fear, tenderness, insecurity, or emotional needs. You feel emotionally accepted without constant performance. And when a man becomes deeply attached, consciously or unconsciously, he starts craving this emotional safety intensely. That is why the one sign always returns: emotional consistency despite emotional distance. Even through confusion, he emotionally returns. Even through fear, he emotionally returns. Even through silence, something inside him keeps reconnecting emotionally. Because attachment creates invisible emotional threads that logic alone cannot cut easily. And perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Someone who kept finding reasons to reconnect. Someone whose emotional energy never fully disappeared from your life. Someone who remembered your emotional world even after periods of silence. These patterns are rarely accidental. Human beings are psychologically drawn toward what emotionally transforms them. Still, emotional attachment should never become an excuse for unhealthy behavior. This is important to understand deeply. Genuine attachment must eventually evolve into emotional accountability. Love is not only emotion, it is presence, effort, honesty, emotional responsibility. A man who is truly emotionally attached will eventually seek emotional alignment between his feelings and his actions. Otherwise, attachment becomes emotional imprisonment instead of emotional growth. This is why emotionally awakened relationships require courage from both people. Courage to communicate honestly. Courage to heal individually. Courage to remain emotionally open despite uncertainty. Real connection is not built through perfection. It is built through emotional truth sustained consistently over time. And the truth is, many people today are starving emotionally while pretending to be emotionally independent. They fear appearing needy, so they suppress genuine attachment. They fear vulnerability, so they perform detachment. They fear rejection, so they avoid emotional honesty completely, but the soul cannot thrive inside emotional numbness forever. Human beings were not designed merely to survive psychologically. They were designed to connect. This is why emotionally meaningful relationships feel so transformative. They awaken dormant parts of the self. They expose wounds requiring healing. They challenge emotional masks. They reveal how deeply loneliness has shaped modern human behavior. And for men especially, emotional attachment often becomes the first moment they realize strength alone cannot fulfill the heart, because no amount of external success replaces emotional intimacy. No achievement replaces feeling emotionally understood. No performance replaces authentic connection. And somewhere inside many emotionally attached men exists a younger version of themselves still longing to feel emotionally safe enough to love openly without fear. That younger self matters more than most people realize. It explains why emotionally distant men sometimes soften unexpectedly with the right person. It explains why guarded men suddenly become emotionally attentive. It explains why silence becomes emotionally heavy when attachment forms deeply enough. Beneath adult defenses often lives an emotionally exhausted soul still searching for connection that feels genuine. So, if you ever wonder whether a man is emotionally attached, stop focusing only on dramatic gestures. Instead, observe emotional continuity. Observe emotional return. Observe whether your emotional existence continues affecting him consistently over time, because emotionally attached men carry people within them psychologically, even when life creates temporary distance externally. And perhaps, the deepest realization of all is this. Emotionally attached men are not looking for perfection. They are looking for emotional resonance. A place where they can exist without emotional armor constantly suffocating them. A connection where silence feels safe instead of threatening. A person whose presence calms the nervous system instead of activating endless emotional defense. That kind of connection changes people. It softens hardened hearts. It heals hidden loneliness. It teaches emotionally wounded souls that vulnerability can coexist with strength. And maybe this is why emotionally meaningful love feels so rare today. Because it demands something modern culture often discourages. Emotional honesty, not curated perfection, not manipulation, not emotional games, just two human beings brave enough to be psychologically real with each other. And when a man finally experiences this kind of emotional truth, the sign always appears. No matter how guarded he is, no matter how logical he tries to remain, no matter how carefully he hides his emotions, he keeps emotionally returning. Because attachment is not merely about attraction. It is about emotional imprint. The soul remembers who made it feel alive emotionally. So, if someone's emotional energy continues finding its way back to you through silence, distance, confusion, or time, do not ignore the psychological significance of that pattern. Sometimes the deepest emotions are revealed not through dramatic declarations, but through quiet consistency the heart cannot maintain artificially forever. And maybe tonight, as you sit quietly reflecting on your own emotional connections, you are beginning to recognize certain people differently now. Perhaps certain silences suddenly make sense. Perhaps certain emotional patterns no longer feel random. Perhaps you finally understand that genuine attachment is rarely loud in the beginning. Often, it whispers first before it transforms everything. Thank you for spending these moments here together. There are very few places left where people can speak honestly about emotions, vulnerability, healing, and the hidden psychological struggles human beings carry silently every day. And if something in this conversation touched a part of you that words normally cannot reach, then stay close to this journey. Subscribe gently, not just for more videos, but for deeper understanding of yourself, your relationships, and the emotional truths most people spend their lives avoiding. And if your heart is still reflecting quietly after this, then continue into the next video, because some emotional awakenings begin with a single realization, but they transform your life one truth at a time.